How close can you let someone be when even kindness feels like a risk? Beneath the rainy skies of Astoria, a grieving father stumbles through mornings that feel empty until the day his daughter stops before a battered old German shepherd, begging for a second chance. Would you dare trust again if all you had left was hope and a trembling paw? As storms rage outside and inside, a family is tested by loss, silence, and the slow work of healing, a journey led, not by words, but by a loyal dog's quiet courage. Will you stay with us to the end? And tell us, what does home truly mean to you? Comment below and discover the answer in this story. Morning pressed softly against the windows of Astoria, Oregon, draping the town in a pale, persistent mist. Along the waterfront, the old docks were half veiled, their pilings dissolving into the river's slow current. Every so often, a gull's cry or the faint bell of a fishing boat cut through the stillness, then faded, leaving behind a hush so complete it seemed to settle in the bones. On the planks of the pier, Matthew Reed moved carefully. Not for lack of strength, he was only 33, his frame sturdy beneath the worn flannel and faded jeans, but as if each step risked waking something fragile. Tucked in the crook of his arm, a newborn slept, swaddled in a blanket of pale green, the tiny rise and fall of his chest, hidden under folds of cotton. Beside Matt walked Grace, 7 years old, her hand curled around the strap of a canvas bag that bumped gently against her side with every step. The air carried the salt of the Columbia River and a damp chill that crept under collars, into seams. Houses perched on the hills above weathered, wood-sided, paint-flaking, the sort of homes that stood through rain and memory alike. Here and there, a porch light still burned, gold against the gray, but the streets were mostly empty. It was early, before the bakery's neon sign flickered on, before the distant clang of the trolley bell. Matt paused at the edge of the pier, letting his gaze fall across the water. The river moved slow and silent, tugging at its banks the way time tugged at him. He exhaled, not a sigh but something quieter, a letting go that never finished. He wore exhaustion like an old scarf, the edges frayed by worry. It showed in the blue shadows under his eyes, the way his hand sometimes hovered protective, uncertain over the soft cap of Charlie's head. Grace walked close but did not speak. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose braid, but stray wisps curled in the mist, framing a face that had learned stillness young. She did not skip or ask questions. She moved as children do who have watched grown-ups break and stitch themselves around the pieces. In her arms, she carried her brother, as if carrying the last warm ember from a fire almost gone. They passed a shop window where raindrops chased themselves down the glass, distorting the dim shapes inside rows of old fishing lures. A hand-painted closed sign. Matt slowed, looking in. But there was nothing he needed. Grace glanced up, the reflection of her eyes layered over his in the watery pane. For a long moment, they stood side by side, not touching, not speaking. The world was so quiet that the only sound was Charlie's tiny breath, the faint creak of the dock beneath their feet. Farther down, the bakery's windows glowed faintly, hinting at warmth and rising dough. But it was the kind of light that belonged to someone else's morning. Matt kept walking. Grace did too. A single crow landed on the lamppost, shaking out its wings, scattering water. The motion startled Charlie, whose face scrunched in sleep, a soft whimper caught in the curve of his lips. Instinctively, Matt adjusted his hold, gentle but sure. It was not so long ago that he had held his wife's hand in this same spot, tracing the river's edge with laughter echoing between them. Now the only echoes were from the past, from things unspoken, undone. At the end of the street, a rusted mailbox stood crooked, its flag missing. Grace paused and reached out, not to open it, but to rest her fingers on the cold metal. Matt noticed, slowed again. He wondered what message she hoped for. What reply? They said nothing. The river moved on. In the distance, the bridge arched over the water high, green, and faintly shining through the mist. The houses lining the shore receded, blurred by fog. Matt's breath left little clouds in the air, fading almost as soon as they formed. Grace hugged Charlie closer, her own small hands trembling with the effort of holding steady. By the time they reached the bakery, the first drops of rain had begun to fall in earnest, speckling the sidewalk and deepening the blue of Matt's shirt. He hesitated at the door, not ready to face the brightness, the well-meaning questions, the warmth that did not reach inside. Instead, he lingered under the awning, listening to the rain drum on metal, feeling the weight of two pairs of expectant eyes, one from Grace, searching for something she could not name, one from Charlie, still lost in the safe world of sleep. He did not urge Grace forward. Inside, a kettle whistled, and someone laughed, far away, separated by glass and a lifetime. Outside, Matt and his children stood alone, wrapped in the sound of water and the quiet persistence of grief. On the street, a stray dog nosed a pile of driftwood, unseen for now. Matt watched the creature for a moment, then lowered his head. Behind them, the river kept moving, slow and implacable, carrying secrets and sorrows out to the waiting sea. The day had only begun, but in that gray morning, every silence held the memory of love and the ache of what it cost to hold on. On the edge of the open-air market, where the cobbled street met a sagging wooden fence, Matt slowed, shifting the weight of Charlie in his arms. The morning's rain had deepened to a steady drizzle, beating on his jacket, soaking the hems of Grace's jeans. The smell of wet earth mingled with something sweet, ripe pears in a basket, a crate of late apples stacked neatly beneath a striped awning. But neither fruit nor bread caught Grace's eye. Just beyond the vegetable stand, under the faded red eave of a shuttered hardware store, an old man sat on a folding chair, shoulders hunched, one hand holding a battered umbrella, the other loosely gripping a fraying length of rope. The rope was tied, almost as an afterthought, to the collar of a German shepherd, lying motionless at his feet. The man, Harmon, wore a canvas coat the color of driftwood and a fisherman's cap stained with years of use. His boots, caked in mud, rested at odd angles on the slick pavement. A half-burned cigarette smoldered between his fingers, sending up thin ribbons of smoke that curled and vanished in the rain. His eyes, small and gray, seemed to be looking past the street, past the market, out into some place only he could see. Beside him, the shepherd Kaiser curled tight into himself, tail tucked beneath his haunches, muzzle resting on his front paws. He was larger once, surely. Now his frame was diminished by age and hardship, his coat mottled and rough, the black and tan fur dulled to an ashen hue. One ear stood, proud but battered. The other flopped over, scarred and misshapen. His body bore the signs of use and neglect. A limp that showed when he shifted, a patch of fur missing over his left hip, a faint line of pink skin across his neck. Propped against Harmon's knee, a piece of cardboard. Dog for sale, $10. Needs home. No one approached. Shoppers skirted the edge of the market, hoods pulled tight, intent on the comfort of routine. Kaiser did not lift his head. He watched the rain, eyes fixed on the trembling reflections in the gutter, as if waiting for something to rise from the water. Grace's steps slowed, then stopped entirely. She stood, her small body rooted in place, the rain speckling her cheeks, soaking her braid. For a moment she was still so still Matt nearly passed her by, until he saw her gaze, quiet and unwavering, trained not on the man, but on the dog. Kaiser did not look back. He seemed to sense her presence, though, for the rise and fall of his breath changed. His tail thumped once, uncertain. Matt watched his daughter, watched the softening of her shoulders, the gentle, open way. Her hand hovered in the air, hesitant to reach, not wanting to startle. He felt something tighten inside him, a familiar ache. Too many burdens already, too many responsibilities. His world was full, overflowing, yet something in Grace's silence made him wait. The rain gathered in pools around the legs of the folding chair, the edge of the cardboard sign turning to pulp. Mr. Harmon did not move. He smoked and stared, an island of weariness in a stream of busy, indifferent feet. Grace's eyes filled with a kind of longing Matt recognized and dreaded. He stepped closer, shielding Charlie from the worst of the wind, and touched Grace's shoulder. "Come on," he murmured. "We should get inside." But Grace did not move. She glanced up, eyes wide, rain making her lashes stick together. She looked at Kaiser again, then at the sign. The dog's gaze, brown, deep, almost human, finally flicked upward, just for a breath. He did not flinch or beg. He simply looked, and in that instant, Matt felt the weight of the dog's years. All the storms weathered, all the hands that had guided or struck, all the times he had waited for someone to notice. Across the market, a bell rang, a bicycle courier, splashing through puddles, face hidden under a plastic poncho. He tried to rise, his hind leg trembling, but settled again, breath rough and shallow. Harmon's hand dropped, heavy and habitual, to the dog's head. He did not speak, just pressed his thumb into the thick fur between Kaiser's ears. As if reassuring himself the dog was still real. Matt studied the scene. He saw the old man's hands, knuckles swollen, nails ridged, the tremor of age barely contained. He saw the way Harmon held the rope not tightly, but as though afraid of letting go and what it would mean. He saw, too, how every part of Kaiser seemed to withdraw, making himself smaller, quieter, easier to pass by. A couple walked past, glancing with polite discomfort at the sign, then away. A teenage boy from the bakery stopped for a moment, shifted his weight, then hurried on. No one else paused. Rain tapped a quiet rhythm against the metal awning. The gentle, ceaseless percussion of time passing. Grace leaned forward a little, the tips of her shoes almost touching the edge of the puddle where Kaiser's tail curled. Her voice, when it came, was just above a whisper. Matt did not hear the words, only saw the movement of her lips, the way she pressed her chin into her shoulder, the softness in her expression. He hesitated, torn between the impulse to protect and the knowledge that sometimes it is in letting pain be seen that it begins to heal. Kaiser blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. He did not beg. He did not hope. He simply waited, as the world spun on and the rain fell harder, washing the dust of another season down the quiet streets of Astoria. Nothing changed in that moment, and yet something did. Matt felt it, the possibility of something new, fragile as breath, as a child's faith that even the most broken can be chosen again. He said nothing. Grace said nothing. But beneath the old Eve, a man, a dog, and a little girl, each in their own way, braced themselves for what the next silence would bring. The rain shifted from a drizzle to something finer, mist rising and falling, softening the market's colors, blurring the sharpness of morning into a hush. Matt stood with Charlie in his arms, the warmth of the infant's body seeping through the blanket, and watched as Grace remained rooted by the curb. He could see, from the set of her shoulders, that she had no intention of leaving. Her gaze was fixed, gentle, but unwavering. A truck rumbled down Main Street, tires hissing over wet asphalt, sending up a fan of water that splashed against the sidewalk. Matt shifted his stance, uncertain. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, a sign, perhaps, or the strength to say no. The old man, Harmon, stubbed out his cigarette with a deliberate motion, tapping the filter against the inside of the ashtray, then placed both hands atop his knees. The German shepherd lifted his head for a moment, the rain running in thin rivulets down his nose. Grace hugged Charlie closer, the weight of her brother as much comfort as burden, her thin arms trembling from the effort. For a moment, Matt saw in her a mirror of his own exhaustion, how hard she worked to hold on to what was fragile, to what might break if handled too abruptly. The space between them was filled with sounds. The splatter of rain against tin, the distant call of a gull, the drone of market voices fading in and out. There was no need for speech. Everything essential seemed to float between glances, in the hesitant movements, in the way Grace's shoes inched a little closer to the puddle where the dog lay. She spoke then, voice almost lost to the world. "Daddy, can I buy that dog?" The words hung in the air, so soft they seemed to dissolve before reaching him. But he heard them. He heard everything in them need. Longing, the residue of too many losses too soon. Matt closed his eyes. There was a time, not long ago, when choices felt simpler, when love had meant building a family, making a home, dreaming for the future. Now, love was something you carried in pieces, picking them up each morning and hoping the ones you dropped the night before would still be waiting for you. He looked at Grace. Rain glistened on her hair, darkening it at the temples. She blinked, and a single tear, or maybe just rainwater, traced a path down her cheek. She didn't beg. She didn't plead. She only looked at him with that searching, ancient hope that somehow the world could be made whole again. Matt felt the old ache rise. Too much responsibility, not enough certainty. The bills on the kitchen table, the empty chair at supper, the way the house echoed at night. A dog was another mouth to feed, another complication, another thing that might die or leave. He tried to summon a reason to say no, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached out, his hand trembling as he rested it on Grace's shoulder. For a long moment, they simply stood there. A man, a girl, a child in arms, all held together by the hush of rain and the fragile thread of hope. Harmon watched, the lines around his mouth deepening. He didn't smile or urge them. He only drew on another cigarette, letting the smoke drift upward, his eyes hooded and far away. His hand, old and calloused, came to rest on Kaiser's head. But the grip was loose, a man learning, slowly, how to let go. Matt turned, finally, to face the old shepherd. The dog looked back at him, unblinking. The eyes were dark, old, reflecting the sky, and something deeper, a story written in scars and silence. Kaiser didn't whimper or wag. He simply waited, as if he understood that being chosen was a kind of miracle, but also a kind of risk. Grace drew a breath. Her lips parted, as if to speak again, but no sound came. She glanced down at Charlie, then at her father, then at the dog. She reached out, not quite touching Kaiser, fingers hovering in the space where trust might begin. Matt's heart ached. He wanted to say, "We can't, not now." He wanted to say, "You're too young to carry more sadness." But in that moment, what rose in him was not fear, but memory, the way his wife used to kneel by the river and scoop minnows into her palm, laughing as they slipped away, teaching Grace how to hold even the most fragile things gently. He squeezed Grace's shoulder. She looked up at him, searching his face for a verdict, a reprieve. Across the street, the world went on umbrellas, bobbing, tires splashing, lives folding into routines. Here, under the weight of gray clouds, a different world waited to be chosen. The old man cleared his throat, not impatient, simply present. He reached for the sign, as if to fold it away, but paused. His eyes met Matt's question, an answer suspended between them. Matt nodded, just once. A small, tired gesture. Grace's breath caught. She pressed her cheek to Charlie's soft head, holding both him and the moment as tightly as she could. No one spoke. Not Harmon, not Matt, not Grace. The decision was made in the hush between heartbeats. Rain drummed its steady applause on the eaves above. Matt reached for his wallet with a hand that shook just enough to betray how much this cost. He fished out a $10 bill, crisp and out of place, and handed it to Harmon. The old man accepted it with a nod, no more, no less. In the space that followed, Grace stepped forward, stooping beside the dog, her hand finally resting, feather light, atop his battered head. Kaiser closed his eyes, not in fear or hope, but in the surrender of a soul who has waited too long for kindness. Matt watched them, the rain falling, the market bustling, and knew that nothing about this was easy. But in the silence, in the way Grace held both the infant and the old dog, he saw the first fragile promise of healing a family, reshaped by loss, learning how to say yes, even when yes was the hardest thing in the world. It was the kind of transaction that required no witness and would never find its way to any ledger or record. In the muted gray of that rain-soaked morning, Matt pressed the folded $10 bill into Harmon's palm. The old man's hand, knotted and pale, closed around it with a weary finality. There was no haggling, no attempt to raise the price or embellish the story. Harmon nodded, once a motion more for himself than for anyone else, and slowly unwound the length of rope from the leg of his battered chair. Kaiser, for his part, did not rise. He lay as he had all morning, unmoving, as if uncertain that anything in his world had truly shifted. Harmon bent low, not unkindly, his voice little more than a rasp, and slipped the loop from the dog's neck. He did not look at Grace or Matt. Instead, he stared into the dog's eyes for a long moment, then gently squeezed Kaiser's muzzle, a silent farewell learned over a lifetime of letting go. Only then did he straighten, the faintest tremor running through his shoulders as he stepped back under the awning, the rope still coiled in his fist. Rain washed over the curb, swirling bits of fallen leaves around Kaiser's paws. For the briefest of moments, he was unmoored, no rope, no command. Only the gentle pull of Grace's hand as she reached out to him. Her fingers brushed the matted fur above his brow, and she spoke no words at all. Sometimes, the deepest welcome is given in silence. Kaiser shifted, slowly and with great effort, his joints stiff from age and the ache of too many nights on concrete. He rose, unsteady but determined, and stood for a moment in the rain, ears flicking at the drip from the awning above. He did not look back at Harmon. He looked at Grace, at the baby cradled in her arms, then at Matt. His tail, thin and ragged, gave a single, tentative wag. The exchange was complete. There was no applause, no closing remark. Harmon slipped into the gray bustle of the market, his absence barely noted by those around him. He moved with a slowness that suggested both relief and sorrow. A man now lighter by the weight of one old dog and all the memories that came with him. Matt watched the old man go, an unexpected pang running through him, a glimpse of his own future. Perhaps, in the hunch of those shoulders, the way a life could grow smaller and quieter until it fit in the space between raindrops. He reached down, steadying Grace with one hand, feeling the warmth of her shoulder beneath his palm. Grace knelt by Kaiser, careful not to crowd him. Charlie squirmed in her arms, small lips puckering in sleep, the world of worry and want still distant. The three of them, man, girl, infant, formed a loose circle, with Kaiser at its center, as if by unspoken agreement he was already theirs, and they were his. The journey home was a slow procession through wet streets. Grace led the way, walking as if balancing something sacred in her arms, her feet careful on the slick pavement. Kaiser followed, never straying more than a few steps from her side. His pace measured, head low, the weight of each step marking the years behind him. Matt brought up the rear, one eye on the baby, one on the dog, and both on Grace. He noticed how she glanced back from time to time, checking not only that Kaiser followed, but that her father was still there, present and accounted for. A family by increments. The houses on their street seemed softer in the rain, the sharp lines of fences and gables blurred by mist. Porch lights glowed yellow against the blue day. The scent of wood smoke drifted from somewhere nearby. At the small gate leading to their yard, Grace paused. She looked at Matt, her face solemn, then reached out and unlatched the gate with a careful twist. She did not urge Kaiser forward. She waited. The dog hesitated, reading something in her posture, her patience. Then, as if accepting an invitation only now fully understood, he stepped past her and into the narrow yard, paws pressing softly into the muddy earth. The house itself was plain, a cottage with faded clapboard siding, a crooked mailbox, and two mismatched chairs on the porch. Matt pushed the door open, the hinges squeaking a protest, and let Grace and Kaiser go ahead. Inside, the air was cool and tinged with the scent of rain and old pine. Grace set Charlie down in his crib by the window, then turned to watch Kaiser as he stood, uncertain, in the center of the room. For a moment, no one moved. The quiet was complete, broken only by the tick of the kitchen clock and the sound of water running from Kaiser's fur onto the worn floorboards. Matt hung his jacket by the door, his movements slow, almost reverent. He did not speak. He did not need to. He watched as Grace approached the dog, kneeling beside him, resting her hand gently on his back. Kaiser stood still, eyes closed, accepting the touch as if remembering what it meant to be safe. It was a strange sort of homecoming, no laughter, no celebration, just the silent transfer of hope between broken creatures. The room felt full, for the first time in a long while, not with noise but with presence, with the fragile promise that perhaps, by caring for what has been left behind, we begin to repair ourselves. Night pressed against the windows as the rain continued. In the hush, Grace sat on the floor beside Kaiser, her fingers curled into his rough coat. Charlie slept on, oblivious. Matt watched from the kitchen, his hands wrapped around a chipped mug, and let himself believe, for the first time in months, that he was not entirely alone. Outside, the market closed. The last stalls shuttered, the river rising in the dark, indifferent and eternal. Inside, under one roof, 4 lives gathered around the tender space where new beginnings always hide in the small acts. The trembling hands, and the lonesome old dog finding his way home at last. Rain fell for days after Kaiser arrived, sometimes as a dull gray curtain, sometimes as a wild, drumming thunder that rattled the glass and turned the garden to mud. In Astoria, the weather was never gentle with its changes. Clouds moved low and fast over the Columbia, swallowing the hills and flattening the color from the world. Inside the house, time seemed to stretch and slow. Matt awoke before dawn each morning, listening to the old radiator's sigh and the restless hum of the rain. The rooms were cold in the corners, especially at night, when the wind found its way through the window frames and made the floorboards shiver. Kaiser kept to himself, wary but present. He circled the living room before settling, always with his back near a wall, his eyes on the door, as if expecting someone or something to appear. At the sound of thunder, he would slip quietly under the old kitchen table, his body tensing, breath gone shallow. Some nights, The lightning would cast his long shadow across the hallway, and Matt would find him there, pressed low and still, ears flat against his skull, trying to disappear. Grace noticed first. She would find Kaiser tucked away, his nose buried under his paw, and she would settle on the floor near him with a book, reading aloud in her small, measured voice, letting the words hang in the air like lanterns. Sometimes, she spoke about her mother, her memories made up of fragments, yellow sweaters, the scent of shampoo, a laugh heard in the bath steam. She told Kaiser about Charlie, too. How he liked to be rocked, the way he curled his hand around her finger when he slept. Kaiser listened, in the way animals do. His ears flicked toward her voice, and though he rarely moved closer, the hard line of his back softened, and his breathing slowed to match the gentle cadence of her words. Matt watched this from a distance, sometimes through the narrow crack of the bedroom door, sometimes from the kitchen, a mug cooling in his grip. He was grateful for the quiet, for the space Grace made between herself and the world, even as it stung him to see how much she needed it. During the day, life gathered itself around small routines. Charlie's feedings, the endless rhythm of laundry, the careful sweep of the broom through muddy footprints tracked in from the yard. On good mornings, when the rain eased for an hour, Grace and Kaiser would stand under the porch roof and watch the river. The dog's nose would twitch, catching scents on the wind, damp moss, wood smoke, the sharp tang of the tide. One afternoon, when the rain was at its hardest and the sky was almost purple with it, Grace found Kaiser trembling beneath the table. She crawled in beside him, pulling her knees to her chest. Neither of them spoke, not even in the language of small comforts. Instead, they sat with the fear and let it settle, unchallenged and unhidden, as if trust could begin in simply not being left alone. Matt struggled with the weight of a new responsibility. He caught himself watching the old dog, wondering if he'd taken on more than he could bear. There were moments, late at night, when the world pressed too close, and he could almost hear the ghost of his wife's voice, her gentle rebuke for being too guarded, her laughter at his careful plans. He wondered, sometimes, what she would make of this patchwork family, this silent animal, with so many secrets behind his eyes. The days rolled on, measured by the progress of the storm. Matt tried to offer scraps of kindness, a soft word, a steady hand with the water bowl, a towel rubbed gently over Kaiser's damp fur after a reluctant trip outside. The dog never flinched from Matt, but neither did he seek him out. Their understanding was still a quiet negotiation, mapped out in the careful observation of habits, the mutual respect of two creatures learning to share space. At night, the house gathered its people, and its dog close. The wind creaked in the eaves. Charlie whimpered in his sleep, his small body twisting in dreams, and Grace rose to soothe him, sometimes tucking Kaiser's old blanket over his crib. The dog watched this, his head tilted, eyes half closed. It was a new rhythm, uncertain but insistent. A life rebuilt, not on certainty, but on the willingness to stay. On the worst night of the week, thunder broke so sharply it shook the windows in their frames. Matt found Kaiser wedged in the gap between the fridge and the wall, his entire body trembling with memory. For a long time, Matt just stood nearby, neither offering nor withdrawing comfort. When the storm eased, he crouched down, palm open on the tile. Kaiser inched forward slow, cautious, but willing, and for the first time, rested his chin on Matt's hand. It was the smallest gesture, but it filled the kitchen with a warmth that lasted until dawn. By morning, the rain had softened, lightening the sky to its familiar pewter glow. Grace made toast, burning the edges, and Matt drank his coffee in silence. Kaiser sat in the corner, eyes following the small family with a growing calm. No one remarked on the changes. In homes made of second chances, Transformation is rarely loud. It unfolds in the echo of a voice at bedtime, the silent offer of a hand, the knowledge that sometimes staying close is the bravest thing anyone can do. The rain in Astoria lingered into the next week, blurring the days together in a soft and constant gray. The outside world shrank to the borders of the Reed family's home. The porch, the muddy yard, the fogged windows that looked out over the slow, slate river. The days settled into a quiet pattern, as if the storm had granted them permission to live smaller, closer, gentler for a while. Kaiser's presence in the house changed the air, though not by force or by noise. He moved with deliberate caution, careful not to startle, as if he feared being sent away for wanting too much. He slept most nights curled near the kitchen door, his head on his paws, ears flicking at every sound from the street or the wind outside. One afternoon, a hush fell after a long bout of thunder. The sky lightened, just enough for a milky band of sunlight to slip through the clouds and cast a faint, honeyed glow over the living room rug. It was then that Charlie began to cry, first a whimper, then the full, desperate wail of a baby undone by some small, unfathomable need. Grace tried to rock him, singing in her thin voice. But Charlie's face scrunched tighter, tears spilling over. Kaiser, roused by the noise, stretched and rose, moving with the slow dignity of age. He approached the crib with care, pausing just out of reach, as if to ask permission. Grace, sensing him there, reached out and stroked his muzzle. Kaiser sat down by the crib, tail brushing quietly against the floor. He did not bark or nudge. He simply kept watch, his presence solid and still, the warmth of his body, a wordless assurance that someone else was there, holding the space while the storm inside the baby passed. Gradually, Charlie's cries ebbed, replaced by a hiccuping sigh. Grace smiled, relief flickering in her eyes, and Kaiser turned to look at her, something old and knowing in his gaze. The room, moments before so tight with worry, loosened a knot untying itself. It was the first time Matt saw the dog as more than a relic of loss, more than another responsibility. He saw him as an anchor, a silent sentinel, his steadiness, a gift that needed no explanation. As the days went on, Grace and Kaiser found their own routines. She would read aloud from picture books, sprawled on her stomach in the middle of the floor, while Kaiser lay beside her, his head heavy on her leg. Sometimes she would braid ribbons into his coat, laughing softly at his patience, and he would endure it all with a kind of resigned grace, accepting her affection as if it were something precious and rare. There were quieter times, too, when Grace would simply lean against his flank, her book forgotten, her face half hidden in his fur. She seemed less small when she sat like that, rooted, steady, her sorrow held, but not consuming. Kaiser bore her weight gladly, his breathing slow and deep. Matt watched these moments with a tenderness edged by grief. He remembered how, not long ago, laughter in the house had felt forced, how the rooms echoed with things unsaid. Now, there were pockets of ease. Charlie's gurgling in the crib, Grace's footsteps pattering to the kitchen, Kaiser's soft huff as he turned circles before lying down by the fire. In the evenings, when rain tapped gentle fingers on the roof, the family would gather in the front room. Matt would stoke the old wood stove, its heat a slow, patient pulse in the bones of the house. Grace would curl beside Kaiser with a blanket, Charlie sleeping in his basket nearby, and Matt, sitting in the battered armchair, would close his eyes for a moment and listen not to silence, but to the chorus of their shared living. The dog's breathing, the child's sleepy hum, the sigh of old wood settling. Sometimes, Matt would find his gaze drawn to Kaiser, watching the dog's chest rise and fall, the subtle flick of his ears as Grace whispered secrets into his fur. He felt the walls around his own heart loosen, just a bit, and he realized that the house was less heavy, now warmer, not from the fire, but from the slow, persistent presence of hope, returning in small, ordinary ways. One night, as lightning flickered far off over the river and rain streaked the glass, Matt found himself awake long after the children had gone to bed. He padded to the kitchen and saw Kaiser lying beside the back door, eyes open, the deep brown of them glinting in the faint light. Matt poured a cup of water, paused, and then, instead of retreating to his solitude, sat down on the floor beside the dog. He said nothing. He did not know what to say. Instead, he rested his hand on Kaiser's back, feeling the warmth beneath the rough coat, the steady beat of a heart that had survived so much. For a long time, neither of them moved. Outside, the rain fell on, untroubled. Inside, in the hush of midnight, two survivors shared the gentle, unremarkable miracle of staying. By the time the storm drifted east, leaving the streets washed and glistening, the house felt changed. The old grief remained, but it no longer crowded out every other thing. There was room, now, for other feelings, for gratitude, for the fragile quiet of connection, for the hope that what had once been broken might yet be mended, slowly, bit by bit. The weeks passed, and Astoria's sky began, at last, to soften around the edges, surrendering its endless gray for patches of blue and gold. The river shone in the late afternoon, reflections trembling like secrets on its surface. Matt stood at the window, mug in hand, and watched the light shift across the floorboards, painting the living room with patterns of slow-moving clouds. Kaiser had become a fixture in the home's rhythm, a silent presence, always near, but never demanding. He slept beneath the window in Grace's room, woke with her at dawn, circled the perimeter of the house each morning, as if checking that all was still safe. Yet, beneath this new steadiness, there were reminders of the past, reminders that not all wounds vanished, even when the world turned gentle again. One Saturday, as Matt sat with Grace on the porch, brushing the knots from Kaiser's thick coat, his hand slipped over the fur at the dog's neck and paused. There, nearly hidden beneath the longer guard hairs, ropey scar, a raised line of pink where the hair grew thin and the skin felt tough, like old leather. It ran from just behind Kaiser's right ear, curving down along his throat, and vanished beneath his collar. Matt set the brush aside, his fingers lingering over the scar. Grace watched him, her eyes wide but calm. "Where do you think he got it?" she asked, her voice quiet, as if not to disturb the dog's peace. Matt didn't answer at first. He let his hand rest, feeling the slow, deliberate thump of Kaiser's heartbeat under his palm. In his mind, he pictured dark alleys, chain-link fences, the echo of distant sirens. He saw a younger version of himself, running toward trouble, the old adrenaline surging. But all he said was, "I think he's had to be brave, more than once." Grace nodded. She stroked Kaiser's ear, careful not to touch the scar itself. "He's still brave," she whispered, almost to herself. That night, as dusk drifted in and the lamp over the kitchen table cast its gold onto the walls, Matt heard the sound of a siren from somewhere down the hill. It started faint and grew a wailing rise, echoing across the rooftops, until it pressed against the windows with a shrill, urgent plea. Charlie, startled from sleep, whimpered in his crib. Grace froze where she was, mid-sentence in a book, but it was Kaiser who reacted most sharply. In a flash, the old dog sprang to his feet, nails scrabbling for purchase on the wood, and raced to the door. He barked, sharp and hoarse, his body rigid with alertness. For a moment, Matt saw a ghost flicker in Kaiser's eyes, the old training, the muscle memory of duty. It was a different dog, just for an instant. Younger, unbreakable, waiting for orders. Matt knelt and called softly, not with command, but with care. "It's all right, buddy," he said. "You're home." The siren faded, drifting toward the river, and the tension in the dog's frame ebbed, leaving him shivering and disoriented. Kaiser slumped down beside the front door, breathing heavy. Grace sat next to him, placing her hand gently on his paw, anchoring them both. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Matt lingered by the window, lost in his own tangle of memories. The lights across the river twinkled, boats bobbing in their slips, the hush of the town settling like a soft blanket. He cradled a mug of coffee gone cold, watching the thin steam rise and fade. It was then, in the hush, that he found Kaiser standing behind him, tail low, eyes steady. Matt sat on the floor, legs crossed, and the old dog came close, lowering his head until his muzzle rested against Matt's knee. The silence stretched between them, deep and unhurried. Matt began to speak, his words tentative, as if afraid to break the fragile peace. He told Kaiser about the woman he'd loved, about her laughter and her stubbornness, about the way she filled the house with music, and how, in her absence, every room felt too large, too silent. He told the dog about his fears of failing, of not being enough, of being left behind by time and by love. Kaiser did not move, did not interrupt. He simply breathed, slow and even, offering the only comfort he could: presence, unwavering and wordless. In that quiet, Matt felt the first true loosening of the knot inside him. He was not healed, not whole, but he was not alone. He rested his hand on Kaiser's back, feeling the warmth of life beneath old scars. Later, as the night deepened, Kaiser climbed onto the rug beside Grace's bed. Grace reached out in her sleep, her hand settling in the ruff of his neck, and the two of them, child and dog, slept on, the moonlight sifting softly through the window, silvering the scars and the dreams alike. And for the first time in many months, Matt let himself hope that maybe, with time and enough silent company, all of them might grow brave again. Night fell heavy and close, thick clouds sealing the sky over Astoria, in a darkness that felt more ocean than air. Rain hammered the roof with a wild, restless urgency, water streaking the windows and pooling in the hollows of the street outside. The storm had come on, suddenly thunder so loud it rattled the kitchen glass, lightning blooming white across the walls, making shadows leap and vanish. Inside the small house, every sound was amplified. Matt was at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled to the elbows, running warm water for Charlie's bottle, when the lights flickered once, then died, leaving the room soaked in black. Only the distant flare of lightning offering brief, stark glimpses of the world. For a moment, the house went utterly still. Charlie's cry broke at a sharp, panicked wail, too shrill, too urgent. Matt's chest tightened. He fumbled in the darkness, reaching for the battery lantern by the stove, finding only the cold edge of the countertop. His voice sounded strange in the dark, trying to soothe the child he could not yet see. Grace, already awake from the first thunder, hovered at the doorway, her arms wrapped tight around her middle, fear making her look younger than 7. Kaiser was there, too, standing alert beside her, ears cocked toward the storm, body tense but controlled. Matt found the lantern, thumbing it on. Pale blue light filled the kitchen in watery halos. He scooped Charlie from the crib, felt at once the heat radiating from the baby's skin, a fever, fast and rising. Charlie whimpered, limp against his shoulder, the small body burning. Matt pressed his hand to Charlie's forehead. The fear that had been coiled quietly in him all season suddenly struck sharp. "Grace, I need the thermometer," he said, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. Grace ran, her footsteps muffled by the storm. Matt whispered, "It's okay, buddy. It's okay." though he was not sure who he was trying to convince. He worked by instinct, measuring, pacing, heart-pounding. The digital readout blinked. 103.2. Too high. Matt's mind ran over what he'd learned, what he'd once known for emergencies, but the power was out. The phone lines dead, no signal, no help coming down the wet, winding road at this hour. Outside, lightning flashed again, and thunder rolled through the house. Kaiser moved then, breaking the tightness of the moment. He sniffed at the air, circled the kitchen once, and padded to the back door. He whined a sharp, insistent sound. Not the anxious yelp of thunder, but something determined, focused. He looked at Matt, eyes clear, almost urging. Matt hesitated. But Kaiser pawed at the door, then back at Matt, then at the door again. Matt glanced at Grace, who stood clutching the lantern now, face drawn tight with worry. "Stay close to me," he said. He bundled Charlie tighter in his blanket, and, without another plan, unlocked the back door. Rain gusted in, cold and wild, soaking them all in seconds. Kaiser stepped outside first, tail high, ears scanning the night. Matt followed, holding Charlie close, Grace at his heels, the lantern's blue light bobbing on the path. Kaiser moved with a strange, deliberate confidence. Nose low, paws sure. Despite the mud and the howling wind, he led them around the side of the house, across the yard, through the thin copse of alder trees, and onto the faint track that wound toward the neighboring houses, one of which belonged to Dr. Larkin, the town's veterinarian, who lived closest and was known for helping more than just animals. Matt slipped once, nearly falling, but Kaiser waited, glancing back, patient as a shadow. Grace followed bravely, her small hand gripping Matt's jacket. The world shrank to the pool of light, the hiss of rain, the steady, faithful movement of the dog ahead. They reached Dr. Larkin's porch. Lights burned inside, backup generator humming. Matt pounded the door, heart in his throat. "Doctor." Larkin answered, eyes wide at the sight. Matt drenched, baby flushed with fever, Grace shivering. Kaiser planted at the steps, not moving. Inside, warmth and the smell of wet dog, antiseptic, and coffee. Dr. Larkin moved quickly, his years of calm, making up for what Matt had lost to panic. He took Charlie, checked his temperature, found the pediatric kit he kept for emergencies. The fever was high but not yet dangerous. The storm had blocked the main road, but medicine and reassurance flowed easily. Kaiser sat by the door, watching as the doctor worked. Grace dried her face with a towel, sitting beside the old dog, stroking his fur with shaking hands. Matt hovered near the table, gratitude and fatigue mingling into something wordless. Dr. Larkin gave Charlie medicine, checked his breathing, and said, "He'll be all right. You brought him just in time." Matt nodded, voice thick. He looked at Kaiser, wet and tired, his eyes as steady as ever. "We couldn't have done it without him," Matt said. But the dog only blinked, already beginning to relax. When the worst of the storm passed, and the rain softened to a memory, Dr. Larkin sent them home with extra blankets and reassurance. Matt carried Charlie, now sleeping, and Grace held Kaiser's leash. The four of them returning through the softened dark, the first hints of dawn stretching pale behind the clouds. They entered the house quietly, the lantern light leading them back. Kaiser shook the rain from his coat and settled beside Charlie's crib, closing his eyes. Grace crawled onto the couch, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. Matt lingered by the window, looking at the sky, feeling the ache in his body fade as he watched his family. The girl, the baby, and the old dog who, by some silent knowing, had saved them all. Morning arrived quietly after the storm, as if afraid to wake what the night had unsettled. Pale sunlight filtered through clouds, touching the rooftops, glinting on puddles gathered in the yard. The house felt lighter, almost emptied of the old tension that had pressed into the corners for so many weeks. Matt sat on the front steps, mug of warm coffee cupped in both hands, letting the steam rise across his face. He wore the same shirt from the night before, sleeves still damp, but for once he did not feel worn down. The ache in his shoulders had loosened, replaced by a quiet gratitude, a sense that, somehow, he'd weathered not just a storm, but a season of doubt. Kaiser lay stretched across the threshold, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. The old dog's coat still bore the faint odor of rain and earth, but there was a new calm in the way he sprawled. His body no longer tight with worry, but open, relaxed, as if at last convinced that he belonged. Every so often, he would lift his head to watch Grace, who moved barefoot through the damp grass, her laughter low and private as she traced her finger along the wet fence rail. Charlie, rosy-cheeked, slept in the patch of sunlight that pooled just inside the doorway. He breathed softly, fists curled beneath his chin, the fever now only a memory. Grace tiptoed in every few minutes to check on him, her presence gentle, almost reverent, a small guardian, making sure the world did not slip away while no one was watching. Inside the house, windows stood open to the cool breeze, carrying the scent of cut grass and river water. There was a sense of renewal everywhere. Sheets hung to dry, crumbs swept from the kitchen table. The clutter of old medicine bottles cleared from the counter. Even the walls seemed brighter, colors returning with the day. Matt watched as Grace wandered over, settling beside him on the steps. Kaiser lifted his head, nose twitching, and repositioned himself so that his flank pressed gently against her knee. She stroked his fur in slow, absent-minded circles, her eyes far away and peaceful. Neither spoke. They sat in the hush that comes when words are no longer necessary. Across the street, a neighbor passed by with her terrier, waving. The dog barked, once, bright and sharp, but Kaiser only flicked an ear, unmoved. Matt remembered how, weeks before, the old shepherd would have tensed, maybe even hidden. Now, he watched the world with calm acceptance, his trust in the little family grown deep as roots. Later, as noon drifted in, Matt found himself at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the breakfast dishes. He could see his reflection in the window, older than he remembered, but steadier, the lines around his eyes earned and lived in. He watched Grace help Charlie take his first steps in the living room, the baby tottering with fierce determination from the edge of the couch to the safe harbor of Kaiser's outstretched paws. Each time Charlie wobbled, Kaiser held perfectly still, enduring tiny fists grasping at his fur, the patient sentinel of all their beginnings. For the first time in years, Matt did not feel the urge to busy himself, to fill every moment with tasks or distractions. He lingered in the kitchen doorway, listening to Grace's laughter and Charlie's babbling. Even the silence felt different now, no longer empty, but full, soft with the promise of ordinary days. That evening, as the sun settled gold and slow across the rooftops, Grace brought out a book and sat beside Kaiser beneath the big window. She read aloud in her careful, halting way, stopping to explain pictures to Charlie, who crawled and tugged at the pages. Kaiser pressed closer, his head in her lap, the weight of his body an anchor to the world. When Matt passed through the room, he paused, just for a moment, to rest his hand on the old dog's shoulder. Kaiser looked up, dark eyes warm with something beyond gratitude. A recognition, maybe, of what it meant to be truly home. Night found the family gathered in the living room, lamplight casting a gentle glow over the small circle they made. Matt sat on the floor, Charlie on his knee, Grace curled up beside Kaiser, her hair spilling over his back. The world outside moved on traffic on the distant highway, voices from the park, but inside, time stilled, the slow, deep breaths of peace settling into every corner. Matt realized then, with a clarity that felt almost like a gift, that he no longer felt left behind. The emptiness that once echoed through the house had been replaced not with noise or distraction, but with the steady, humble presence of lives slowly mending. He looked at Grace, at Charlie, at the old dog who had come to them broken and afraid, and saw in all of them the quiet triumph of second chances. Kaiser, too, had changed. No longer did he hide or startle at every sound. At night, he slept outside Grace's door, tail thumping gently against the floorboards. When Matt passed by on his way to bed, he would pause and listen to the steady, reassuring rhythm of Kaiser's breathing, and to the hope, at last, that none of them would have to face another storm alone. Evening in Astoria stretched its golden arms across the sky, painting the river and rooftops with bands of pale orange and lavender. The world felt newly rinsed. The air fragrant with cut grass, rain-soaked cedar, and the faint tang of sea wind. The storm was only a memory now, leaving behind the hush that follows honest tears, the quiet after a hard winter, the gentle exhale of survivors who have learned to wait. In the Reed family's small yard, the garden glistened with leftover droplets, and the wooden fence shone silver in the waning Sunday. Matt moved slowly, watering the tomato vines, his boots sinking just slightly in the soft earth. Each plant was an act of faith, coaxed from seed and stubbornness, tiny roots holding tight, fragile leaves reaching for warmth. Matt paused to watch the water bead and fall from a curling green leaf, his breath easy, his heart neither heavy nor restless. On the steps, Grace sat cross-legged in the last light, her hair tumbling over her shoulders, a paperback book in her lap. She read aloud in a low, steady voice, words drifting out over the yard like petals on a stream. Charlie lay beside her, asleep, cheeks pink with sun and health, one small fist curled in the folds of his blanket. Grace read to him anyway, just as she had read to Kaiser, filling the evening with the gentle rhythm of stories. Kaiser rested beside them, his body pressed along the cool stone, eyes half shut in the peace of a dog who no longer fears being forgotten. Grace's hand moved absently over his back, tracing slow circles, her touch light and sure. Every so often, Kaiser's tail thumped quietly in the dust, a silent gratitude that needed no words. From the yard, the house glowed, windows open, the scent of baking bread slipping onto the breeze. A single lamp casting its amber promise through the living room. Matt looked in through the kitchen door and watched his family. Grace leaning her head against Kaiser's shoulder, Charlie breathing softly in sleep, Kaiser's ear flicking at the hum of a moth against the screen. There was nothing perfect here. The garden was patchy, the porch needed paint, and the house, though filled with laughter and light, still echoed some nights with old loss. Yet, in the unremarkable grace of that evening, Matt saw not what was missing, but what had grown. The gift was not in what had been restored, but in the simple, stubborn fact of their presence together. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Matt set aside his watering can and joined them on the steps. He sat close, but not too close, letting the hush of dusk settle around them. Grace closed her book, glancing at him with a smile too old for her 7 years, and then leaned her head against his arm. Charlie stirred, stretching, his feet nudging Kaiser's flank. The old dog did not move, only pressed closer, a steady, grounding weight. No one spoke. For a long time, the only sound was the sigh of wind through the poplars and the distant call of a train crossing the bridge. Matt let his gaze wander over the small, imperfect circle they made, each of them marked by loss. None of them whole, all of them belonging. A thought drifted through him, quiet as a prayer. We are not perfect, but tonight, we have each other. Grace's hand slipped into his, Charlie burrowed deeper into the crook of his arm. Matt rested his free hand on Kaiser's broad, scarred back, feeling the slow, faithful rise and fall of the dog's breath. In that moment, the ache of the past softened. There was no need to measure how far they had come, or to count what had been taken. There was only the sun-warmed skin of his children, the trusted nearness of an old dog, the smell of bread, and the patient work of a garden growing roots. He remembered then how hard he had once fought to shield himself from hope, from the risk of loving what might leave. Yet here they all were, still together, still reaching, still learning to stay. When night finally settled, Matt carried Charlie inside, tucking him gently into his crib. Grace followed, her hand never leaving Kaiser's fur, leading the dog with her as naturally as a shadow. They climbed the narrow staircase. The house quiet, except for the soft thump of paws and the creak of old wood. Downstairs, Matt lingered at the open door, listening to the hush of the street. He thought of all the ways a family can fall apart, and all the ways sometimes almost invisible, always hard-won it can come together again. He turned off the porch light and climbed the stairs. In Grace's room, Kaiser lay curled at the foot of her bed, already asleep. Grace had arranged her books in a neat row, her favorite one resting by Kaiser's nose. Matt stood in the doorway, watching his daughter's steady breath, the gentle shape of the dog at her feet, the glow of the nightlight painting both in gold. He did not pray for miracles. He only wished for the courage to keep loving what was here, imperfect and unpromised. He whispered, but to remind himself, we are enough. Just this, is home. And in the quiet that followed, he heard the answer, not in words, but in the softness of a child's sleep, the faithfulness of an old dog's heart, and the hush of a house that had finally learned to hold all its sorrows and all its hope together. Sometimes, the most ordinary evenings reveal what truly matters. A quiet porch, a scarred old dog at your feet, a child's hand resting on yours. Healing, it turns out, isn't loud or sudden. It arrives quietly, in the courage to stay, in the kindness we offer and accept, even when we're unsure. Perhaps happiness isn't about perfect families or flawless days, but about sharing our brokenness and finding, in one another, the shelter we thought we'd lost. If this story touched you, I'd love to know, what does home mean to you now, at this moment in your life? Share your thoughts below, and let's remind each other that hope and healing still live in the simplest acts of love.